6 hours ago, something happened that no equation in human history could have predicted. At exactly 8:42 UTC on March 2026, the laws of orbital mechanics, the same laws that have governed every planet, every moon, and every comet since the birth of this solar system, simply stopped applying. Sensors across the entire northern hemisphere flagged an event carrying a probability of exactly 0% under any known natural model. Not a rounding error, not a glitch, zero. And before you assume this is about a solar flare or a geomagnetic storm, stop. This is something far beyond either of those. This is about 3I Atlas, and what it did this morning will change the way you understand the universe forever. Picture an object sitting 240 million kilometers from Earth. For months, astronomers have tracked its path using standard Keplerian physics, the same reliable framework we use to land rovers on Mars and guide probes to the edge of the solar system. Everything was predictable. Everything was normal. And then, this morning, it stopped being either of those things. The object didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It was locked. Data streaming in real time from NASA's Deep Space Network and the European Space Agency's swarm satellites confirmed something that no astrophysics textbook has a chapter for. 3I Atlas anchored itself to Earth's magnetic North Pole, holding a geostationary flux alignment that should, by every known law of physics, tear a comet into a cloud of debris, but it didn't break apart. It held steady, as if it had always meant to be there. Think carefully about what that means. We are talking about an object matching Earth's rotation not through gravity, but through magnetism. The energy required to create a magnetic tether across hundreds of millions of kilometers of empty vacuum is roughly equivalent to the total electrical output of the United States for 3 full years, focused into a single concentrated beam aimed directly at our magnetic pole. This is not background radiation. This is not ambient space weather. This is a directed, sustained, impossibly precise interaction, and its effects are already being felt on the ground beneath your feet. Reports flooded in from aviation authorities across Canada and Scandinavia within minutes of the event. Pilots flying over the Arctic Circle described something that stopped seasoned professionals cold. Their analog compasses were not drifting. They were spinning fast, uncontrolled, and in perfect unison. At 9 UTC, one commercial flight above the Arctic reported a magnetic deviation of 18 degrees in mere seconds. The needle didn't point north, it pointed upward directly at the coordinates of 3I Atlas. That is not a sensor malfunction. That is not an instrument error. That is a compass responding to a stronger north than the one inside our planet. When you examine the data coming out of the World Magnetic Model headquarters, the picture becomes even more unsettling. The lines of magnetic flux aren't simply fluctuating the way they do during a solar storm. They are being pulled, physically stretched, drawn tight like a rubber band being yanked by something massive, lurking out there in the darkness between worlds. In decades of studying interactions between solar wind and planetary magnetospheres, what scientists call space weather, nothing has looked like this. What is unfolding right now is not weather, it is engineering. Nature does not build a magnetic lock between two celestial bodies separated by astronomical units. Nature does not cause compass needles in London, New York, and Tokyo to synchronize their spin with the rotation of a distant object. What we are witnessing is an intentional interaction, a handshake, and the grip is tightening by the hour. And here is where the story gets truly extraordinary. The James Webb Space Telescope captured data 2 hours ago that was immediately flagged as corrupted because the computers analyzing it simply could not process what they were seeing. But that data wasn't corrupted. It was just impossible because 3I Atlas isn't only pulling on our magnetic field. According to that data, it is feeding on it. And to understand the full magnitude of what that means, we first need to go back to the beginning, to the moment this object first appeared in our sky, and why everything astronomers thought they knew about it was wrong from the very first day. When 3I Atlas was first catalogued on the 19th of December 2025 by the Atlas Survey Telescope in Hawaii, the astronomical community gave it a straightforward classification, a hyperbolic comet, a visitor from deep interstellar space, moving fast, destined to swing around the sun and leave our solar system behind forever. The initial models were clean and simple. Gravity pulls the object inward, it accelerates, it loops past Earth, and it exits. That is the standard celestial choreography we have observed hundreds of times. Nobody lost sleep over it. nobody considered it unusual. And that confidence, that comfortable certainty, is exactly what made the first anomaly so jarring when it arrived. By January 2026, something in the data refused to fit the standard model. 3I Atlas was not outgassing the way a normal comet does. There was no glowing tail of dust and water vapor trailing behind it, no luminous coma forming as solar radiation heated its icy surface. Instead, spectroscopic analysis revealed something that made researchers read their own results twice. The object's surface composition was extraordinarily rich in ferromagnetic metals, iron, nickel, and cobalt in concentrations roughly 10,000 times higher than those found in any known comet in recorded astronomical history. A normal comet is, as the classic description goes, a dirty snowball. 3I Atlas is effectively a flying mountain, conducting metal, hurtling through interplanetary space. And that composition, that single detail that seemed like a curiosity in January, turned out to be the key that unlocks everything happening today. The first warning of what was coming did not arrive through a telescope. It came through a network of satellites specifically designed to monitor Earth's own magnetic health. At 3 UTC this morning, 5 full hours before the anchor event, the global magnetic field began to vibrate. Not with the random, chaotic static of a solar storm, but with a frequency. A structured, repeating pulse like a knock on a door. The data that followed convinced the scientific community this was not natural. ESA's Swarm Alpha satellite, orbiting at 450 kilometers altitude, detected a sudden localized spike in magnetic intensity directly above the North Pole. The reading surged by 400 nanoteslas in just 3 seconds, a massive shift by any scientific standard. At the exact same moment, NASA's Themis mission, monitoring the magnetosphere from a much higher altitude, independently confirmed a distortion forming in Earth's magnetic tail. And simultaneously, on the ground, the Intermagnet Observatory in Fairbanks, Alaska, registered the same reading at the identical millisecond. 3 completely independent instruments, operating at different altitudes, using different methodologies, arriving at an identical conclusion: Earth's magnetic field was being probed. Sit with that word for a moment. Probed. We tend to think of our magnetic field as a passive shield, something that deflects solar radiation and allows life to exist on this planet. But in physics, a magnetic field is also a tether. A sufficiently powerful external magnet can grab onto a planet's field lines it can latch on, and that is precisely what the data shows. 3I Atlas began doing in the early morning hours before most of the world was awake. At 5:30 UTC, the probing phase ended and the connection phase began. Data from the Cluster 2 space mission revealed something extraordinary forming in the space between Earth and the object, a flux tube. Think of it as a magnetic highway, a channel of structured energy, physically linking our North Pole to the core of 3I Atlas across 240 million kilometers of vacuum. This is why those compass needles are spinning. Under normal conditions, a compass points toward magnetic north, because that is the dominant local field. But right now, there is a second north competing with the one generated by Earth's own molten core. 3I Atlas is producing a field so intense that navigational instruments across the northern hemisphere cannot choose between them. And here is the detail that shifts this from remarkable to inexplicable. If you analyze the spin rate being reported by pilots over the Atlantic needles rotating once every 23 minutes, and then look at the confirmed rotational period of 3I Atlas itself, the numbers are identical. The compasses are not spinning randomly. They are tracking the rotation of the object in real time. The probability of a natural comet having a rotational period that perfectly synchronizes with a magnetic disturbance of this specific type on Earth is 1 inch 4.7 billion. That is not a coincidence. That is a handshake, and the handshake was only the beginning. As the 7 UTC hour arrived, the data took a turn that left astrophysicists struggling to find language for what they were observing. Under normal circumstances, when two magnetic fields interact at the intensity being measured here, the result is violent, a reconnection event, a catastrophic snap of field lines, releasing enormous quantities of energy, similar to the mechanism behind solar flares. But the 3I Atlas did not trigger that explosion. Instead of snapping the field lines, it smoothed them. Data from the G1 satellite showed the energy flow stabilizing into something called laminar flow, perfectly ordered, efficient, and controlled. To put the precision of this in context, imagine directing a full-pressure fire hose across a football field so that every single drop of water lands inside a small cup without a single drop spilling. That level of control, sustained across 240 million kilometers of turbulent interplanetary space, is something we struggle to replicate in the most advanced controlled fusion laboratories on Earth. And then, at 8:15 UTC, something traveled down that flux tube that was not magnetic force alone. The High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP, in Alaska, detected a carrier wave on the 2.8 MHz frequency. The modulation index of that signal was exactly 0.618. For anyone familiar with mathematics, that number carries immediate weight. It is the golden ratio, the same proportion found in the spiral of a nautilus shell, the branching of trees, the structure of spiral galaxies. Nature does produce the golden ratio in biological and astronomical patterns. What nature does not do is broadcast it as a deliberate radio signal on a specific frequency aimed at a planet's magnetic pole from a metal object 240 million kilometers away. The data at this point presents a picture that is no longer ambiguous. 3I Atlas had established a physical link with our planet, bypassed the role of gravity entirely, engaged Earth's magnetic field like a precision docking mechanism, and was now transmitting structured information down that connection. The critical question was no longer whether this was happening. Every instrument confirmed it was. The question was what would occur the moment the connection fully tightened, and the answer began revealing itself in the energy numbers, which were telling a story that challenged the deepest foundations of physics as we practiced it. To discuss the anchor itself honestly means confronting hard numbers rather than comfortable theories. The flux tube connecting 3I Atlas to Earth, as measured by the Cluster 2 mission, carries an energy density of approximately 10 to the power of 16 joules per cubic meter. To feel the weight of that figure, consider this. It is the equivalent of detonating a 1 megaton nuclear warhead every single second, focused entirely into a channel no wider than the state of Rhode Island. Under any natural scenario, an energy release of that magnitude hitting Earth's magnetosphere would be catastrophic. Every satellite in orbit would be instantly destroyed. Power grids across the planet would collapse simultaneously. But none of that is happening. The energy is stable, flowing, with a control that has no precedent in natural phenomena. Maintaining a magnetic flux tube of this intensity across that distance, against the constant pressure of the solar wind, against the interplanetary magnetic field, and against the continuous rotation of Earth itself, requires a sustained power output calculated at approximately 400 terawatts, 20 times the total energy consumption of all human civilization combined, generated by an object less than 10 kilometers across. The obvious question is where that energy is coming from. A natural comet has no internal power source capable of producing anything resembling this output. And at 6 to 15 UTC, the solar wind dropped to near zero density due to a lull in solar activity. If 3I Atlas were harvesting energy from the sun like a natural dynamo, its output should have weakened at that moment. Instead, it strengthened. The magnetic intensity of the anchor beam increased by 14%. At the precise moment, the external energy source dropped to near nothing. That is not a passive object responding to its environment. That is an active system compensating for a power drop by drawing from an internal reserve. The energy is coming from inside. While the world's attention was fixed on magnetism, the gravitational data was quietly delivering its own impossible message. At 7:45 UTC, just minutes before the full anchor event locked into place, the trajectory of 3I Atlas shifted. The change was small, 0.004 degrees, but the mass involved makes that small number devastating to every natural explanation available. Shifting an object with an estimated mass of 33 billion tons by even a fraction of a degree requires a force of 10 to the power of 12 newtons applied instantaneously. There were no jets firing. There was no outgassing, no collision, no detectable external force of any kind. The object simply moved. When NASA's JPL Horizon system analyzed the acceleration vector, the direction was perfectly perpendicular to the Sun, ruling out solar radiation pressure and the Yarkovsky effect in a single calculation. The only physical mechanism capable of producing that specific vector change without any mass ejection is the Lorentz force, the force exerted on a charged particle moving through a magnetic field. But for the Lorentz force to move a comet of 33 billion tons, the object would need to carry an electric charge of nearly 500 coulombs per kilogram. Any natural rock carrying that charge would explode instantaneously from electrostatic repulsion, disintegrating into a dispersed cloud of fragments. Yet 3I Atlas moved and remained perfectly intact. The paradox is airtight. It should have exploded from the charge required to move it, but if it wasn't charged, it had no mechanism to move. It moved anyway, and it survived. This demands a material explanation that goes far beyond anything cataloged in our periodic table. The conducting metals detected on its surface cannot simply be standard iron and nickel. The tensile strength required to hold that magnitude of electric charge without shattering points to a material with structural properties. We have never encountered something capable of behavior that existing material science cannot model or predict. And then the rotation stopped. At 8:30 UTC, the moment the anchor locked onto the North Pole, the 3-minute spin that had been synchronizing compasses across 2 hemispheres ceased in under 3 seconds. A mountain of metal rotating at roughly 2,000 miles per hour at its equator came to a complete halt relative to Earth's magnetic field lines. The G-forces, produced by decelerating 33 billion tons in 3 seconds, would be measured in the millions. Every known natural structure, every asteroid, every comet, every rocky body we have ever studied would be pulverized beyond recognition. Radar imaging from the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex confirmed no debris field, no fragmentation, no structural compromise of any kind. It stopped, it was locked, and it held together perfectly. You do not stop a spinning object and anchor it to a planet by accident. You do not perform that maneuver unless you need a stable platform, and at 8:42 UTC, the reason for that stable platform became undeniable. That is the precise moment the signal changed. Everything documented up to 8:30 UTC, the flux tube, the compass synchronization, the 400 terawatt energy output, had all been prepared. The anchor was not the destination, it was the foundation for what came next. At 8:42 UTC, the carrier wave HARP had been tracking on 2.8 MHz and did not simply strengthen. It modulated. For hours, instruments had been detecting raw energy. Suddenly, they were detecting information. According to a leaked report from the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory in Canada, the modulation pattern shifted from a simple sine wave to a complex, non-repeating digital stream. The data rate jumped from 0 to 400 gigabits per second faster than the entire fiber optic backbone of the internet beaming directly into Earth's ionosphere. And 3 minutes into that transmission, at 8:45 UTC, a specific sequence repeated. Cryptographers at the SETI Institute ran the pulse pattern through standard binary conversion algorithms, and the result was not alien language. It was not a mathematical constant. It was Earth's own atmospheric data, a precise, real-time readout of ozone concentration over Antarctica, followed by nitrogen levels in the upper atmosphere, followed by the exact magnetic field strength at the core mantle boundary deep inside our planet. The full picture that emerges from those readings is staggering in its implications. 3I Atlas is not simply broadcasting into space. It is actively reading our planet using the magnetic tether as a sensor probe, drawing data from our atmosphere and our core, processing that information and transmitting it outward. At 8:50 UTC, the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia detected a secondary signal departing 3I Atlas and heading away from Earth, aimed with precision directly toward the galactic center. The object anchored itself to our planet, harvested detailed planetary data, and began relaying that data out of the solar system. Whatever is on the receiving end of that transmission now knows the state of Earth's ozone layer, its atmospheric chemistry, and the strength of the magnetic field at its core. And then, just before recording began at 9:15 UTC, the transmission changed one final time. The binary data stream stopped. A new pattern emerged in its place, a countdown, a descending sequence of prime numbers beginning at 17,389 and stepping down in perfect synchronization with the atomic clock at the United States Naval Observatory. When the rate of descent is calculated, the sequence reaches 0 in exactly 48 hours. When NASA recognized what the numbers represented, the live feed from the Deep Space Network was severed. The public data stream went dark at 9:20 UTC. But amateur radio operators across the globe are still receiving the signal clearly. It is strong, it is coherent, and it is counting down. Two possibilities now define our reality, and there is no comfortable middle ground between them. If 3I Atlas is a probe, an automated instrument sent to gather planetary intelligence, then the countdown marks the completion of its data collection. A transmission finished, a survey concluded. A silent acknowledgement from something that has been watching far longer than we have been looking. In that case, the 48-hour mark is an ending. The anchor releases, the flux tube collapses, and the object continues its journey out of the solar system, carrying a complete portrait of our world to whoever sent it. But if 3I Atlas is something more than a probe, if the magnetic anchor was not the full operation, but only the first phase of a larger physical process, then the countdown marks a beginning. A beginning of something our civilization has no framework to prepare for, no technology to intercept, and no historical precedent to draw meaning from. The magnetic North Pole is currently drifting southward at 40 kilometers per hour. That is a full century's worth of geological drift compressed into a single hour. Power grids are vulnerable. Satellite navigation systems are degrading. The ionosphere is absorbing 400 gigabits of transmitted data every second. The planet is being read like an open book, and the reader is about to finish the last page. The facts are no longer in question. 3I Atlas is not a comet. It is an object capable of manipulating planetary magnetic fields with 400 terawatts of directed energy. It has hacked Earth's magnetosphere, scanned our planet from atmosphere to core, established a communication link pointing toward the galactic center, and set a countdown that expires in 48 hours, all confirmed by 3 independent space agencies before the public data feed was cut. The telescopes in Australia, Chile, and South Africa are still locked onto the signal. The prime numbers continue their descent. The modulation grows more complex with every passing hour. Whatever 3I Atlas was built to do, it is doing it now deliberately, precisely, and completely on schedule. The clock is running, the signal is live, the entire planet is waiting for 0. And when that moment arrives, every assumption humanity has ever made about its place in this universe will either be confirmed or shattered forever. If this kind of deep dive science content makes you see the world differently, subscribe right now, because the story of 3I Atlas is still unfolding, and every update will be covered here first. Hit the like button if this keeps you thinking, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below, what do you believe happens when that countdown reaches 0? The conversation starts now.